beginning of a new stage in the American peace movement. A stage in which the cutting edge becomes active resistance. Because we are determined that our voices will be heard and our bodies will be
In October 2001, artists and activists on the front lines of social change gathered in Vermont for a celebration. Together, they created this audio documentary on Dave Dellinger and the power of the people, with songs, poetry, dramatic readings, rare recordings, and personal reminiscences. This is Nonviolent Warriors, Dave Dellinger, and the Power of the People, Part 2.
Throughout the war years, Dave, Elizabeth, and their comrades in the peace movement resisted repression and risked arrest as they continued to struggle against the tide. A demonstration at the Capitol in 1943 led to another prison term for Dave, this time 2 years at the prison farm just outside the walls of Lewisburg Penitentiary. During that sentence, he joined a strike to end segregation and fasted for 2 weeks to stop prison censorship and the use of the hole. The protesters won a small victory that time, ending the censorship of mail and reading material. By the time Dave was released in 1945, Elizabeth had given birth to their first child, Evan Patchen, and was living at a Pennsylvania apple farm. 4 other children followed: Michelle, Tasha, Dan, and Ray. Meanwhile, between picking apples and working at a nearby dairy farm, Dave teamed up with Bill Kooning and Ralph DiGia to launch Direct Action, a magazine reflecting their militant opposition to war and faith in the power of nonviolent action. Dave's first editorial looked at the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He wrote,
Hiroshima and Nagasaki were atomized at a time when the Japanese were suing desperately for peace. The American leaders were acting with almost inconceivable treachery by denying that they had received requests for peace. The bombs were exploded on congested cities filled with civilians. There was not even the slightest military justification because the military outcome of the war had been decided months earlier. The war for total brotherhood must be a nonviolent war, carried on by methods worthy of the ideals we seek to serve. The acts we perform must be the responsible acts of free men, not the irresponsible acts of conscripts under orders. We must fight against institutions, but not against people. There must be strikes, sabotage, and seizure of public property, now being held by private owners. There must be civil disobedience of laws, which are contrary to human welfare. But there must be also an uncompromising practice of treating everyone, including the worst of our opponents, with all the respect and decency that he merits as a fellow human being. We can expect to face tear gas, clubs, and bullets, but we must refuse to hate, punish, or kill in return.
And now, I'm honored to introduce a few people who remember the days of direct action and life with Dave and Elizabeth. First, Ralph DiGia, a friend since the 1940s, who also spent time in Lewisburg, by the way, and was part of a group that formed a cooperative on land bought in New Jersey in 1947.
When I was in Danbury, I met Don Benedict, who was one of the seminary students who, with David, refused to register. And he told me a lot about David and what he did, and that's how I knew about him, but I had never met him. So when several of us were on strike at Danbury, we were transferred out of Danbury to several places. I was transferred to Lewisburg, and we were put in a special cell block where they keep the tough guys always get in trouble and stuff like that. So one day, after we were there a few days, came up to me, he spoke to me and he said, listen, he says, you guys are really making it tough on us. Because you're in this cell block here, the hacks, the guards are always around here, and we don't like that at all, so you better get out of here. And he said, so okay, so I hear him, but I didn't know what to do about it. I just listened to him. The next day, another person came up to me and said to me, are you a friend of Dave Dellinger? Yes, I am. Yes, I'm a friend of David. And he said, well, listen, if you let me know, if any friend of Dave Dellinger, if you're a friend of Dave Dellinger, any friend of Dave Dellinger is a friend of mine, and if anything happens, you let me know, and we'll take care of it. Now, this was not a nonviolent person, but I know what he meant. So why did this happen? One of the reasons I learned was that David really worked with the people around him, and when he was on, and he stood up for his fellow workers. When one person was put in a hole because he disobeyed an order, David defended this person. As a matter of fact, went to the hole to support this man. So David was the kind of fellow who always supported the underdog, and so he got a good reputation among not all the prisoners there, but certainly among the prisoners who worked. And it was for this reason that this person came up to me and said he would do something to help me because of David. I just wanted to point that out, as that the kind of a person that David was, who would always be for the underdog. And well, later on, we were all transferred to a different dormitory, and David joined that group there. And that was the end of that story. I mean, there's so many stories I can tell. Then when David was released from prison, a friend of his, Kenneth Patchen, and one of his sons is named after Evan Patchen, and he led him to a cottage up in the Catskills, and then later on he invited me and Bill Kenning, also from Lewisburg, to share, recreation and what do you call that? R&R, to recover from the prison experience. And that's where the direct action was printed. Someone gave us I think they bought listen to this, a printing press. It was hand-fed, foot-pedaled, and typeset by hand. And I don't know how we ever got the magazine put together, but finally there was this issue of direct action, and there was someone just read from one of the articles that appeared there. And later on, we had talked in prison about the good idea of forming communities, so that if anybody, so if we could protect each other if somebody went to jail, that the rest of the community could support him and stuff like that. We talked about that. Well, following that idea, in 1947, we, Dave and Betty, I guess, I call her Betty because that's what she was then, but it's Elizabeth Betty, same person. And I think, whoa, man, I get in trouble for that one. Yeah, anyway, and we're pals. Each other a long, long time. And anyway, the way I remember this, that the money put down to purchase this land, to put a deposit on it, was from Betty. From Betty, I understand that she went to her parents and asked for inheritance. The money that she would get for inheritance, she needed it now. She wanted to rather use it now than wait for later. And that's the way I think that we first started this commune in Glen Gardner.
And now, a few words from Dave and Elizabeth's daughter, Natasha Singer.
I didn't know I was going to say a few words tonight either, but I did sort of threaten my father. I'm really coming from the perspective of a family person. I've known Dave all my life. And I've known Ralph all my life, too. And I love Ralph, and Ralph has been a surrogate father to me. And it's so good to come here and see Marv and Ralph and Bob and people that knew me when I was young. And when I grew up, it was just a way of life. Peace walks, peace demonstrations, it's just the only thing I knew. I didn't know anything different. We just lived on a farm out in nowhere, and in some ways it was a very peaceful and beautiful life. And I went on the Quebec-Guantanamo Walk for Peace in '63. I was 14. I begged my parents to let me go. And as always, my father said yes. My mother wasn't so sure. And Marv agreed to be my legal guardian. And I hope he didn't give him too hard of a time. People said I was pretty precocious back then. But I came back to high school in a beatnik dress a few days late, and it was my first time in this big regional high school, because we'd gone to this tiny little school with about 100 people, and everybody was looking at me to see if I was going to salute the flag, because my two brothers before me hadn't. And so all of these rumors were going around the school about me, and all of a sudden, I just made a turn and became a rebel. And so I joined the rebel crowd, but not the kind of rebel that my father was. So I'd come home and I'd say, if people spit in my face, I'm not going to turn my cheek. I'm going to, spit them back, or I'm going to hit them back. And so all those years of high school, I became a fighter. And then, the whole thing, our whole family just sort of blew apart when the 68 Chicago riots happened. And my mother couldn't get a job, and my little brother and sister refused to go back to school because we were really in a real rural area. And it was, we grew up in the McCarthy era, and, a lot of hatred was sort of focused on us because we were different. And so I went through this rebel period, but then my father was on trial. So what am I going to do? I got to go. And because I love my father. And, I really was very much involved in the movement in those days, in the anti-Vietnam War days, and I, in those days, really felt that I needed to make a revolution. I needed to really change things. And I even toyed with, going with the more violent forces, and I chose not to. But I was in a very different place than my father was at the time, and I could not really appreciate his nonviolent stance. I was very angry. And over the years, I've come to so much appreciate what he gave us as a family, and me in particular, I'm speaking for myself, but, myself, that it's so simple. I'm not really involved in the movement. I haven't been involved in the movement for many years. I follow a Native American path, following that little piece of my heritage. And that's worked for me, but it's the way that I am with people, and it's the way that I walk in the world, and it's the gift that I got from my parents and the way that I grew up. And I used to be bitter because I grew up different from everyone, and I never knew where I fit in. And I moved to the cities eventually, and I lived in a lot of different places, and everybody had like a cultural heritage or an ethnic background, and I said, well, what's mine? I have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I've come to understand that my cultural heritage is the peace movement, is these songs that were being sung. I dreamt I saw Joe Hill last night. I grew up on those songs, and I love them. And I just want to say thank you to my father and my mother for being such special people, and for really helping me to appreciate the very simple truth of what is, and that it's all really about love. And I used to think that was a bunch of hogwash and bullshit, and that's what I used to say. And because I was a fighter, and I was, raving mad about all the injustice in the world. And now I know it just starts little by little, just how we talk to each other, how we treat each other, how we walk. And I really appreciate my sister, Michelle, and my brother, Danny. And I wish Patch, my oldest brother, could be here. Howie is here. He was pretty much out of the house when I was coming up, but he was also, a brother to me and adopted by my parents. And Ray, I wish could be here. He left us back in '88. And all of, my granddaughter.